The wind howled down the ridges, slicing through the trees like a blade. In the midst of the frozen West Virginia mountains, Jack Harper and his German Shepherd Major walked their usual patrol. But today, something was off. A patch of green grass thriving in the dead of winter caught their attention. Underneath a strange, warm earth hummed with unnatural energy. Jack knelt down, the hairs on his neck standing up. Then from the corner of his eye, he saw it, a faint glint from the tree, a hidden cable leading to a birdhouse. It wasn't a birdhouse, it was a camera. And it was watching them. Who's been here and why? The wind cut through the mountain sharp and unforgiving as Jack Harper and Major made their way across the snow-dusted clearing. It was late November, and the world was draped in a veil of white, but something about the silence felt wrong today. Jack's boots crunched in the snow as he checked the perimeter, Major's watchful eyes scanning the trees. Then they stopped. A patch of vibrant green grass, impossibly lush for winter, stretched out in a perfect circle surrounded by snow that should have buried it by now. Jack's brow furrowed. He crouched down, reaching a hand to the warm soil beneath. It was like the earth was alive, pulsing with heat, an anomaly in a land that knew nothing of warmth this time of year. Major whined a low growl rumbling in his chest as he circled the edge of the patch, sniffing with urgency. Jack stood looking around. The dog was too still, too focused. Something was buried here. Jack straightened up, scanning the distance. The truck, the one that didn't belong, was still parked on the road, idling like a ghost. And then a sudden crack in the stillness, a camera's lens staring straight at him from the oak tree. They weren't alone, and they were being watched. Jack Harper stood at the edge of his property, gazing out at the mountain expanse that had been his home for over 2 decades. The wind had started to pick up, whipping through the skeletal trees, carrying with it the chill of the coming winter. He was no stranger to the harsh weather of the West Virginia mountains. In fact, it was one of the things that had drawn him here all those years ago. This land, this place of solitude and silence, had become his refuge after the chaos of his service. And for Jack, there was no peace like the stillness of these woods. He adjusted the worn brown leather jacket that he wore like a second skin, his thick plaid flannel shirt peeking through the unzipped front. The flannel red and navy blue stood out starkly against the muted shades of the snow-covered landscape. At 62, Jack's body had aged in the way only a man who had lived through both war and labor could understand. His face was weathered, the lines etched deep from years of hard work and harder living. A thick salt and pepper beard shielded his face from the biting wind, but his eyes, sharp and clear, missed nothing. Beside him, his German Shepherd Major stood alert, his large frame a perfect companion to Jack's own, matching him in both strength and quiet confidence. The dog's fur was a mix of gray and white, his amber eyes reflecting the ever-changing world around him. Major had been with Jack for 5 years, ever since he had found the dog abandoned at a shelter, scarred from a past Jack had never asked about. From the moment they had met, they were inseparable, 2 soldiers in a war that had ended long ago. Jack had come home from his military service, but Major had brought the sense of loyalty and protection Jack had missed in his retirement. This land was Jack's peace, his sanctuary. It had been hard-earned, paid for, with sweat and blood from years of military service, and then more years spent clearing, tilling, and building on this isolated patch of land. There were no neighbors within miles, no distractions beyond the occasional trip into town for supplies, and certainly no interruptions. Jack liked it that way. It was a quiet life, and that was exactly how he wanted it. As he walked beside the snow-dusted fence, his boots crunching in the deepening snow, Jack felt a sense of satisfaction in the routine. Checking the perimeter fence was something he did almost every day. It wasn't much work, but it kept him busy, kept his mind clear. As much as he appreciated the solitude, even Jack Harper knew that too much silence could become a burden. He needed the small tasks to ground him. Major walked ahead, his sharp nose sniffing at the air, scanning for scents that Jack had long since learned to ignore. The dog's senses were far more attuned to the world around them than Jack's ever could be. Every so often, Major would glance back at Jack, ensuring that he was still nearby. But otherwise, the dog was focused entirely on the task at hand. Jack let him work. The bond between them had grown strong enough that they communicated in subtle ways. Looks, gestures, the shift of Major's body when something was amiss. And something was amiss today. Jack felt it before Major even made a sound. The wind seemed to die down the usual whispering hiss through the trees, fading into a thick, uncomfortable stillness. It wasn't quite the kind of silence that one would expect on a cold winter's day. It was more like the world was waiting, holding its breath. Jack paused, frowning. He adjusted the worn leather gloves on his hands and squinted into the distance. It wasn't just the stillness that bothered him. It was something else. In the distance, half obscured by overgrown brambles along the old logging road, sat a white pickup truck. Jack's first instinct was to dismiss it. There were no vehicles like that in this area, not unless someone was passing through from the next county over, and that was rare enough that it didn't raise any alarm. But this one was different. It was too clean, far too pristine for a place that was so remote. Every vehicle that made its way up the winding roads around here looked like it had been through a battle with the elements' rust mud scratches. This truck looked brand new, like it had just been driven off a showroom floor. Jack's eyes narrowed as he scanned the truck more carefully. There was something off about the way it was parked, too. It was halfway in and halfway out of a turnout, as if the driver had just stopped to rest, but hadn't bothered to pull off the road completely. Odd. Most people around here respected the space. Everyone knew how tight the roads could get in winter. The truck was out of place, and out of place things had a way of unsettling Jack. Major's low growl broke the stillness vibrating through Jack's bones. It wasn't the usual warning sound, the growl that signaled a stranger or a wild animal. This was different. This was sharper, more urgent. The dog's fur was standing on end, his amber eyes locked on the truck as he shifted his weight, ready to spring into action. "Easy," Major Jack murmured under his breath, though the dog didn't seem to hear him. Major's instincts were far more in tune with the world around them than Jack's. Jack knew that growl. He'd heard it before, back when they had lived in a much darker world. Major only growled like that when he sensed something Jack couldn't see, something dangerous. Jack watched the truck for a long moment. The brake lights flared red and then dimmed. The truck sat still, as if waiting for something, or someone. Jack felt a rising unease coil in his chest. No one came out here, not unless they had a reason. He was about to turn and move on when Major suddenly jerked his head away from the truck. His attention now focused on the far edge of Jack's property, where the land dropped off into thick forest. It was a part of the property Jack rarely visited, a tangled mass of brambles, fallen trees, and dense undergrowth. The kind of place where things got lost. Major's ears flattened against his head, and his growl deepened, vibrating with a sharp urgency that Jack had never heard before. It wasn't just the truck anymore. The dog had picked up something Jack couldn't see. "Major, what is it, boy?" Jack said softly, turning toward the dog. The shepherd ignored him, his head-lowered nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air, his paws digging at the snow as he pulled toward the edge of the forest. Jack cursed under his breath. The silence had broken. Whatever was happening wasn't just happening out there on the road, it was here in his backyard. He hadn't expected this. He wasn't sure what was happening yet, but Major knew, and that was enough for Jack to trust him. He sighed, tightening the grip on his gloves, and followed Major toward the thicket. His boots crunched louder in the snow as he walked, and the wind seemed to pick up again, making the snow swirl around him. There was something haunting about the way the branches of the trees swayed, casting long, skeletal shadows against the pristine white ground. Jack had always found peace here, but today it felt different, like something was watching, waiting. The two moved through the underbrush, Jack pushing aside brittle rhododendrons that reached for his clothes, their thorns snagging at the fabric. The snow was deeper here, and it clung to his boots, soaking through the thick denim of his jeans. Jack was used to the discomfort, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that this was not a normal day. They reached the clearing. The trees opened up to reveal an impossible sight, an unnatural circle of green grass, vibrant and thick, untouched by winter's icy grasp. Around it, the snow had melted away into slush, and a faint mist rose from the ground. Jack stood still, feeling the weight of the moment. He knelt, pressing a bare hand against the ground. It was warm, too warm, like the earth had been heating itself from below. He looked up, his mind racing, but before he could make sense of it, Major barked sharply again, pacing around the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed on something above. Jack followed the dog's line of sight, the oak tree, and high up, nestled in the crook of a branch, was a birdhouse. At first glance, it appeared like any other, a rustic weathered structure, perched in the branches. But Jack knew better. His trained eye caught something that made his stomach tighten. There, running down the back of the tree, was a thin black cable. It had been painted over, hidden, but it was there. Jack felt his pulse quicken. That wasn't a birdhouse. It was a camera, and it was watching him. In that moment, the silence of the mountains shattered. They were not alone. Jack stood frozen, his eyes locked on the hidden cable running down the oak tree. It was subtle, tucked into the bark, and camouflaged with a textured gray paint, but it was unmistakable. A thin black line that led to something even more unsettling. A birdhouse that wasn't a birdhouse at all. The dull glint of a glass lens flashed from inside the hollow, and Jack's stomach tightened. He stood up slowly, wiping his gloved hand across his face, his breath coming out in a visible fog. His heart began to race the silence that had surrounded him now, thick with the weight of something far more sinister than he had anticipated. For a long moment, he just stared at the tree, unable to process what he was seeing. In all his years of military training and working the land, he had never encountered anything quite like this, a setup so precise, so hidden. It was as though someone had anticipated him, had watched him long enough to know his every move. Major growled again, low and deep, his amber eyes fixed on the birdhouse. The dog's body was taut, alert, his every muscle coiled in preparation for something Jack couldn't see yet. It wasn't just the hidden camera or the strange patch of grass. Something deeper, something darker was pulling at the edges of Jack's senses, as if the very earth beneath his feet was whispering secrets it was never meant to share. Jack took a deep breath, trying to ground himself, but the unease gnawed at him. He had walked this land for years, a silent observer of the passing seasons, a protector of his peace. He had fought wars both abroad and in his own mind, and returned home to this mountain retreat for a reason. He had come here to be left alone. But someone or something was not respecting that. Jack turned his attention back to the birdhouse. He knew it wasn't just a camera. It was a high-tech receiver, probably a satellite uplink of some kind, disguised to blend into the environment. He had seen similar devices during his time in the service covert operations, hidden beneath layers of camouflage and misdirection. He knew exactly what this was, a signal that had no business being out here in the middle of nowhere. "Major, stay close," Jack muttered, his voice rough, more to himself than the dog. He turned away from the tree and began pacing the perimeter of the clearing, his boots crunching in the snow. He had to think. He had to make sense of this. But as he moved, the landscape seemed to shift in ways he didn't fully understand. The patch of green grass, a circle that defied nature, looked even stranger now. He had first thought it a simple geothermal anomaly, perhaps a rare pocket of warmth rising from below. But as he circled it, stepping carefully through the snow, Jack realized how unnatural it truly was. The soil was too warm, the grass too lush, too vibrant. Something was buried beneath it, something that had been generating heat for years, perhaps decades. Major trotted alongside him, his nose working the air, his gaze never leaving the strange patch of earth. It was clear the dog had picked up on something Jack hadn't yet identified. Major's senses were far keener than Jack's. He could smell the difference between the natural and the manufactured, the living and the artificial. Major's tail was stiff, his hackles slightly raised as he moved in a wide arc around the edge of the patch, sniffing the snow with increasing urgency. Jack crouched again this time, brushing the snow away from the center of the patch. His hand met the earth, and again the warmth radiated through his glove. This wasn't a natural geothermal feature. It was something far more deliberate. His fingers trembled as he ran them over the ground, feeling the faintest vibrations beneath the surface. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was a signal, and it was being transmitted from here. Someone had buried technology beneath the soil, a facility of some kind, running full power. The warmth wasn't natural, it was artificially generated. Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just a glitch in the landscape. It was a system running beneath his feet, hidden from sight, and it was connected to something far larger than he could see. He stood up slowly, looking around. The realization settled into his gut with the weight of inevitability. This was no accident. Someone had been using his land for something. He had thought himself safe here in his little corner of the world. But this was a violation, a breach of the peace he had fought so hard to protect. Jack's eyes snapped to the tree again. The hidden cable, the camera, the satellite uplink, it all clicked into place. Whoever was behind this operation had been running it for a long time, maybe years, and they had chosen his land because it was remote, because no one would think to look here. It was the perfect hiding spot. Major Jack said, his voice low and steady, "Let's get to work." He turned toward the house, his mind already shifting into gear. He needed equipment, something to help him figure out just how deep this went. It was time to dig into the earth and see what secrets it held. Major followed obediently, but Jack could feel the weight of the dog's unease. They had seen and done a lot together, but even Major knew this was different. This wasn't just an animal trespassing on their land. This was something far more dangerous. As they walked back to the cabin, Jack's mind raced through possibilities. Was this an old government facility, a Cold War-era relic buried beneath the earth? Or was it something more modern, a rogue operation run by criminals? He had no answers, just questions that were piling up faster than he could process them. The quiet had broken, but now Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the silence was still watching them, waiting for their next move. As they reached the cabin, Jack paused by the porch, his eyes scanning the woods beyond. And that's when he saw it. The white pickup truck was no longer at the turnout. It was gone. Had they seen him? Or was he just imagining things? Jack turned to Major, whose eyes were fixed on the road, ears perked. Major let out a low growl, a warning that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. It was too quiet. And yet Jack couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still watching them. "Stay close," Major Jack muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that was never too far from his side. The dog's growl deepened, low and guttural. It wasn't just an animal instinct now. It was something deeper, something far more primal. Jack had faced down enemies before in distant lands and foreign wars. But this was different. This was a fight for his home, his peace, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that from him. As he turned to gather his tools, the wind picked up again, howling through the trees. It was no longer the soft whisper of a winter's breeze. This time, it felt like a warning, and the hunt was just beginning. The chill of the winter morning bit at Jack's face as he returned to the clearing, a feeling of unease clinging to his skin like the cold. His boots sank deep into the snow with every step, and Major walked beside him, just as silent, just as watchful. They had left the cabin in a rush, Jack gathering tools and supplies, a makeshift plan forming in his mind as they moved. Something wasn't right. The anomaly in the ground, the satellite uplink, hidden in plain sight, and the inexplicable warmth beneath the earth, it all pointed to a secret that had been buried for far too long. Jack had seen his share of hidden operations during his years in the service, clandestine military operations, secretive government facilities, even abandoned Cold War relics. But this was something different. It was as if someone had carefully placed this facility right beneath his feet, buried deep enough to avoid detection, but close enough to remain hidden in plain sight. Whoever had done this had been watching, waiting, using the quiet of the mountain as their cover. They reached the clearing, where the strange patch of green still lay, the grass still thriving impossibly in the dead of winter. Jack paused at the edge of the circle, staring down at the warm earth beneath the snow. He knelt again, pressing his palm to the ground. It was as if the soil itself were alive, pulsing with hidden energy. He knew better than to trust his instincts alone, but the strange warmth, the vibrating earth. It all pointed to something far deeper than a natural geothermal vent. This was engineered. This had a purpose. "Major, stay alert," Jack murmured, standing up and brushing off his knees. The dog moved closer, sniffing at the edges of the patch, his amber eyes scanning the surroundings. Jack's fingers tightened around the handle of the pickaxe he had brought with him. He had to find out what lay beneath. He wasn't just going to let this go. The feeling in his gut had only deepened since that moment in the woods when he had first realized that someone had tampered with his land. Whoever was behind this was good, too good. And now it was time to turn the tables. He set to work the steel of the pickaxe, striking the frozen earth with sharp, rhythmic thuds. Each swing revealed a little more of the concrete slab that lay buried beneath the surface, its heavy rusted edges slowly revealing themselves, as though it had been waiting for someone to dig it up. Jack paused after a few minutes surveying the work. The slab was enormous, at least 6 feet by 6 feet, and clearly reinforced with steel rebar. The markings on the surface were faint, but recognizable. USEES, 1964. Jack's pulse quickened as the reality of what he had found began to sink in. U.S. Emergency Escape Shaft, 1964. He knew exactly what this was. The government had built hundreds of these during the Cold War, designed as secret fallout shelters for high-ranking officials, places where they could retreat in the event of nuclear war. Some of them had been decommissioned, filled in, or sold off. But a few like this one had simply been forgotten, left to rot beneath the earth. But this one was different. The warmth, the strange signal, the high-tech equipment, it wasn't just a relic. It was running, and it had been running for decades. "Major, get back," Jack said, his voice steady but urgent. The dog didn't hesitate, moving back several paces, his body tense, his gaze fixed on the task at hand. Jack wedged the pickaxe under the concrete and heaved. The slab shifted with a groan, and Jack's muscles strained as he pushed with all his weight. The cold air bit at his face as the concrete lid finally budged, revealing a dark, gaping hole beneath. For a moment, Jack just stood there, staring down into the blackness. A part of him wanted to turn back, to leave this mystery buried where it belonged. But that wasn't the kind of man he was, not anymore. He grabbed his flashlight from his jacket and shone it down the shaft. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a rusted ladder that led down into the depths. A stale warmth hit him, almost immediately, air that had been trapped in the shaft for years, maybe decades. Jack's instinct screamed at him to step away, but he forced himself to stay focused. The air was warmer here than it had any right to be, especially for a mountain that saw sub-zero temperatures in winter. It was like the bunker had never really been abandoned. Jack lowered himself to one knee, his hand gripping the cold, rusted iron of the ladder. As he did, his thoughts wandered back to his time in the service. He had been a combat engineer, trained to build, fortify, and dismantle just about anything. He had served in places where survival depended on one's ability to adapt. But those skills, those tools, those were a lifetime ago, buried beneath the layers of time. He had hoped, after all these years, to never have to use them again. But this was different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting the land he had fought so hard to reclaim from the chaos of his past. And this land, this mountain, was his. No one was going to take that from him. He grabbed the kerosene lantern from his pack and attached it to a long length of paracord, tying it off with careful, practiced hands. "We test the air first, Major," Jack muttered to the dog, who sat quietly nearby. Jack lowered the lantern into the shaft, counting the knots along the rope to measure depth. "Don't go out," Jack whispered under his breath, as the lantern descended the flame, steady flickering only slightly in the cool air. He watched it intently. If the air quality was bad, if there was no oxygen down there, or worse, toxic gases, the flame would flicker out. But if the ventilation was good, if there was air moving beneath the surface, the lantern would burn steady. He counted the feet, feeling the rope slide through his fingers. 1 meter, 2 meters, 4, 5. The lantern's flame swayed slightly to the left, Jack's heart skipped a beat. There was air down there, fresh air flowing from a ventilation system. Whoever had set this up had been pumping in oxygen to keep their equipment from overheating. "That's good," Jack muttered to himself, lifting the lantern back up with a sigh of relief. The flame was steady. There was no immediate danger from gas. But that didn't mean the place was safe, not by a long shot. He had just confirmed that someone powerful was operating down there, and they were doing it on his land. Jack climbed back to his feet and began to work setting up a tripod with treated lumber and rope. His mind was already calculating the next steps. They needed to go deeper into the belly of this mountain to see what secrets lay hidden beneath the concrete floor. But he wouldn't go in unprepared. His time in the military had taught him that much. His hand brushed the worn M40 gas mask that hung from his belt. He hated the thing. It was a reminder of the past, of the wars, of the people he had lost. He hadn't worn it in years, but the rules hadn't changed. If he was going to descend into that shaft, he was going to do it safely, even if it meant facing the ghosts of his past head-on. Major paced behind him, the dog's body language showing his unease. Jack could feel the tension in the air, a silent understanding between them. Major didn't need words to know what was coming. The dog's instincts had never failed him before, and Jack knew that whatever lay below, they were going to face it together. The work was hard, and it took longer than Jack expected. The cold had set in by the time he finished rigging the pulley system, and his muscles were sore from the physical effort. His shoulder, a reminder of too many years of lifting, hauling, and carrying, throbbed with a dull ache. Finally, he was ready. He strapped the M40 mask to his face, securing it tightly. Major watched his head cocked to one side, his body still. Jack reached down and clipped the dog's harness to the rope. The dog's gaze met his, a silent exchange of trust. Jack adjusted his own harness, checked the carabiner, and gave Major one last look. "We're just doing recon, buddy. We go down, we look, we come back up. I promise." Major didn't bark or whine. The dog simply leaned into Jack's side, his body language that of a soldier, ready for whatever came next. Jack tightened his grip on the rope and began to lower Major into the darkness. They were stepping into the unknown. The rope creaked under the strain as Jack gently lowered Major into the darkness of the bunker's shaft. Each hand-over-hand movement was calculated deliberate as the German Shepherd descended into the void below. Jack's eyes never left the dog, even as his own pulse quickened the rhythm of his breathing, distorted by the thick rubber of the gas mask. The lantern's steady glow flickered weakly against the walls of the shaft, casting long, warped shadows that seemed to stretch toward them, eager to pull them into the depths. The wind had died down outside, but within the confines of the shaft, the silence felt oppressive, heavy, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It was as though the earth itself had become aware of the intruders. Jack gritted his teeth and focused on the task, his muscles burning, as he continued to guide Major down. The dog had long since disappeared from view, swallowed by the abyss below, but Jack could feel him still there, still connected by the rope, still trusting him to bring him back to safety. They descended further. The shaft was deeper than Jack had anticipated, the walls of the concrete well narrowing as they spiraled downward. The sound of Major's movements was muffled, as if the very air in the tunnel was absorbing the noise. Jack checked the rope again, making sure it was secure, his breath fogging up the inside of the gas mask. His heart was steady, but there was an unmistakable knot in his stomach. This wasn't just an old government facility. It was more than that. Whoever had operated it, whoever had hidden their operation here, had planned for something. At first, Jack had thought it was a relic of the Cold War, just another forgotten bunker buried beneath the earth. But now the more he descended, the more he realized this wasn't just about history. This was something current, something that had been running for decades in the shadows. The modern technology, the warmth radiating from the earth, the hidden satellite uplink, it all pointed to an operation that had been in full swing right under his feet. Jack's thoughts flashed back to his years in the service. His mind began to drift through the memories, each one sharpening his focus. He'd served as a combat engineer, and his specialty had been in building fortifications, dismantling explosive devices, and understanding the intricacies of military infrastructure. But after the war, he had buried those skills in the quiet of the mountains, hoping to leave behind the violence and chaos of the world he had known. But it seemed the world had followed him here. His mind wandered back to a different time, to the dusty, sun-baked deserts of the Middle East, where he had once faced a similar unknown. The faint smell of smoke lingered in the air, a reminder of a war fought over lands that were not his own. Jack could almost feel the weight of his old pack, the sting of the sun on his neck, the crunch of sand beneath his boots. It was in that place so far from the mountains of West Virginia that Jack had first learned to trust his instincts. He thought of the mission in 1984, in a far-flung corner of the world, where his team had been tasked with securing an old Soviet base. The old military complex had been abandoned, overgrown with weeds and rust, but deep within the concrete bunkers, Jack had uncovered a hidden cache of weapons, enough to spark a war of its own. The mission had been a success, but it had come at a cost. He had lost friends there, people he had trusted, men who had walked beside him in the worst conditions, and now they were just names on a list. As Major's body disappeared from sight, Jack's memories of that operation felt clearer than ever. They had been a team back then, every man a part of the whole, each playing his role. Jack had been the engineer, the one who built things, fortification shelters and escape routes. The others had been the warriors, the ones who carried out the hard work, the fighting, the bloodshed. But even then, it had been about survival, protecting what mattered. What Jack had learned over the years was simple things didn't last. Peace didn't last, but you fought for it anyway. "Down you go, Major," Jack whispered to himself, shaking the memories away. "Stay with me." The rope slackened slightly as Major reached the bottom, and Jack felt a weight lift from his chest. He pulled the rope back up hand over hand until it was taut. The dog was secure at the bottom. Jack exhaled, relieved that the first part of the descent had gone smoothly. He switched gears, starting to climb down the shaft himself. The weight of the M40 mask pressed down on his face, and he adjusted the straps, ensuring the fit was tight. His gloved hands gripped the cold, rusty rungs, and he carefully made his way down one step at a time. The metallic scent of rust filled the air, and Jack could feel the temperature drop as he descended further. The warmth he had felt earlier seemed to vanish the deeper he went. With every step, the memories from his time in the service surfaced. He couldn't escape them, not when everything about this mission felt so similar to the ones he had done before. The quiet before the storm. The anticipation of what lay ahead. The feeling that no matter how prepared you were, the unknown always had a way of catching you off guard. And just like those missions, this one had a sense of urgency. There was no turning back now. Jack knew it. He wasn't just investigating an old bunker. He was diving into the heart of something far darker, far more dangerous. Someone had been using this place, running operations beneath the earth, and Jack knew he had to uncover who or he would be left with more questions than answers. Finally, Jack's feet touched the cold concrete floor. The air down here was thick with dust and stale, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of an abandoned place. It was alive, as though the entire structure was still in use, still operating beneath the surface. The hum of the ventilation system was subtle, but it was there just enough to remind him that the facility was still active. Major stood at attention, his body pressed against the curved wall, his tail low but wagging. Jack unclipped the dog's harness, and Major shook himself, shedding the tension from the descent. The German shepherd's gaze was unwavering as he scanned the room, every muscle taut, ready to react. Jack's flashlight beam swept across the room. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. This wasn't just a Cold War relic. It wasn't some forgotten command center left behind in the wake of history. No, this was something alive. The walls were lined with metal lockers, still intact, still standing after all these years. Some of the lockers were open, their contents long gone, but the others remained sealed. On the floor beside a heavy metal desk sat a logbook, its pages yellowed with age but still readable. But it wasn't the lockers that caught Jack's attention. It was the equipment. In the center of the room stood a large server rack. its black metal frame filled with blinking lights, green, red, amber, flickering in a mesmerizing pattern. Jack could feel the hum beneath his feet, the vibrations of the machinery pumping life into the facility. The air was thick with the buzz of hard drives running, the low whine of cooling fans spinning at maximum speed, the kind of sound that told him this place was still operational. These weren't just old relics of a forgotten era. They were being used right now today. Jack took a step forward, his flashlight illuminating the cables and wires that snaked across the floor, tangled and chaotic. This wasn't just an old command center. It was a fully functional operation. Someone was running a high-tech operation out of this forgotten place. But who and why? Major's low growl interrupted Jack's thoughts, pulling his attention to the far corner of the room. There, beside a rusted filing cabinet, was a discarded fast food wrapper, its red and yellow plastic glinting in the dim light. Jack's stomach turned. These people weren't just trespassing. They were desecrating something that had been built to protect people during a time of crisis. This facility had been a last line of defense, and now it was being used as a glorified data farm. Jack's hands curled into fists, the anger bubbling up from deep inside. These intruders, whoever they were, had crossed a line, and they weren't going to get away with it. But as Jack surveyed the room, he knew that the real battle wasn't going to be fought in this room. It was going to be fought in the corridors of power, and Jack was going to take the fight to them. The next steps were clear. He needed to find out who was behind this and why they had come here. And more importantly, he needed to stop them before they could do any more damage. The game had changed, and Jack was ready for whatever came next. Jack stood in the darkened room, his gaze fixed on the cluttered workstation in the far corner. The dim glow of the machinery illuminated his features, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into the very walls. The weight of the moment hung heavy on him. He could feel it pressing against his chest, every breath a reminder that he was no longer simply investigating an old Cold War relic. The operation running here had purpose, and someone was pulling the strings. He moved toward the desk, his boots making soft thuds against the concrete floor. On the table, the laptop screen glowed with a jumble of code and encrypted data, its blinking cursor a stark contrast against the dead quiet of the room. The noise of the fans and machines seemed louder now, almost suffocating. He leaned in closer, the dull hum vibrating through his chest as he examined the screen. Lines of code flashed by impossibly fast, too fast for Jack to catch. But one thing stood out to him, a string of encrypted numbers running along the top. His mind clicked into gear, old skills resurfacing with ease. He had seen this before. This wasn't just data being processed, it was a live feed. Someone somewhere was monitoring this signal, watching it as it streamed out of the bunker. Jack's heart skipped a beat. A satellite uplink. The same one he had seen at the tree camouflaged as a birdhouse. Someone was tapping into this dead zone, using the mountain as their secret server farm to launch an operation far beyond the valley. His mind raced. Cryptocurrency ransomware. Or worse, was it something more nefarious? Major's low growl interrupted Jack's thoughts again, a warning sound that vibrated through the room. Jack turned his hand instinctively, moving to the handle of his machete, though he didn't unsheath it. The dog was facing the far wall, his eyes locked on something in the darkness. Jack followed Major's gaze, a chill creeping down his spine. It was a small, dark corner of the room nestled behind the equipment racks. Nothing seemed out of place. But Major had already sniffed the air, his body tense, ready for something Jack hadn't seen. The dog's behavior was always his first warning, and Jack had learned long ago to trust it. Stay close. Major Jack whispered, his voice low and controlled. He moved toward the corner, his boots scraping softly against the floor. The flashlight beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the space. There, tucked into the farthest corner, was a stack of old filing cabinets, their metal surfaces rusted with age. Jack frowned. These hadn't been here earlier. He could have sworn the room had been empty of any files or documents when he first entered. It was possible he hadn't noticed them in his earlier rush, but now that they had caught Major's attention, Jack wasn't so sure. Major stepped forward, his paws soft on the floor, as he began to sniff at the base of one of the cabinets. The dog's growl deepened as if confirming Jack's growing suspicion. Jack reached out his fingers, brushing the cold metal handle of the top drawer. He tugged it open, the rusty metal scraping loudly in the otherwise silent room. Inside the drawer was filled with papers, yellowed with age, but still legible. There were old maps, blueprints of the facility, and something that made Jack's heart race, a ledger. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, most of them dated in the early 1960s. It was a log, a record of who had worked here, who had come and gone, and more importantly, the projects they had been running. Jack's fingers hovered over the pages, his eyes scanning quickly. His heart pounded as he read through the names: military contractors, high-level engineers, and a few unfamiliar ones. The project titles, however, were what caught his attention. Some were related to defense technologies, others to research and development. But there was one phrase that stood out: Project Helix. His breath caught in his throat. Project Helix. He had heard that name before, but where his mind spun, racing through his memories, trying to place the context. It was the kind of name that sounded like a government project, cutting-edge, top secret. He had no idea what it entailed, but he could tell by the entries in the ledger that whatever it was big. Too big to be abandoned, and too dangerous to ignore. Jack quickly scanned through the rest of the documents, flipping pages with shaking hands. His eyes landed on another entry, one that made his stomach turn. Breach of protocol. Security lockdown initiated. The date on the entry was recent, just a few weeks ago. Someone had been here recently. Someone had broken into this place, sabotaging the security and potentially running a massive operation without authorization. Jack's mind raced. Was this a criminal operation? The thought gnawed at him, but there was something about the way the equipment was set up, the way the facility was still operational, that told him this wasn't a simple criminal syndicate. This was military-grade tech. This was classified, and whoever was running it had more resources than Jack had imagined. As his thoughts swirled, Jack's gaze shifted back to the corner of the room. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it was impossible to ignore the small, blinking red light in the ceiling, positioned directly above the main server rack. Jack's pulse quickened. It was a motion sensor, the same kind he had seen at the oak tree. Someone knew he was here. He grabbed Major's collar and pulled him closer. The dog's ears were flattened, but he remained still, his body trembling with the tension that had settled in the room. They had been found. The sound of footsteps, distant but approaching, broke the silence. It wasn't the crunch of snow that Jack had grown so used to. It was the steady rhythm of boots on concrete, of people moving fast, coming closer. They were coming for him. Jack moved to the server rack, his heart pounding in his chest. His first instinct was to destroy everything. Smash the servers, hack the cables, sever the connection, and disappear into the woods. But no, he couldn't afford to be reckless. The only way to stop these people was to gather evidence, to make sure whoever was behind this was exposed. Major whined a sharp, urgent sound, but Jack didn't have time to respond. His mind was already working through the next steps. He had to finish what he had started. He couldn't leave until he understood the full extent of what was going on here. He grabbed the power cables that fed the servers. His machete flashed in the dim light, the blade slicing through the thick wires with one swift motion. Sparks flew, and the lights flickered as the servers sputtered to a stop, their whirring fans slowly dying. But the red light above the server rack didn't go dark. It was still there, still blinking, an incessant reminder that someone somewhere had eyes on them. "Major, let's go," Jack said urgently. His voice was tight as he started to move toward the door, pulling Major along. They had to get out before whoever was on the other side reached them. The danger was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was moving fast, and it wasn't going to stop until they were caught. Major followed close behind his eyes, never leaving Jack's, his body tense, ready for whatever came next. Jack didn't hesitate. He moved toward the door, but the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hall. It was time to leave the bunker, and to find out exactly who was hunting them. But as they neared the exit, Jack's heart froze. A voice crackled through the intercom, distorted yet unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come here, old man." Jack's blood turned to ice as the voice echoed through the room, crackling over the intercom like a snake slithering through the walls. It wasn't just a voice, it was a challenge. A cold, calculating tone laced with the arrogance of someone who knew exactly how much power they held. "You shouldn't have come here, old man." Jack's grip on Major's collar tightened. The dog's body tensed next to him, his ears flat against his head, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Major was ready, he always was. But Jack wasn't. Not yet. Not until he knew exactly who he was dealing with. The intercom's harsh static gave way to a sharp click, and the sound of a door opening reverberated through the bunker. Jack's heart skipped a beat as his mind raced. He had known they were coming, but now they were here. The first real sign that someone on the other side had noticed his presence. He could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him, but his instincts took over. He hadn't come this far to back down. His hand shook slightly as he drew the machete from its sheath, the cold steel glinting in the dim light of the room. His movements were calm, precise, as he slid the blade into the waistband of his pants. Major's low growl rumbled deeper now, as if the dog was sensing the same shift in the air. Jack could feel the tension in the dog's body, the primal instinct that Major had honed through years of service at Jack's side. He wasn't just a companion, he was a protector, and Jack needed him now more than ever. The footsteps were closer. Jack's breath quickened as he pressed his back against the wall, pulling Major close. He needed to stay hidden. He needed to know where they were coming from, and he needed to stay one step ahead. The intercom crackled again, the voice smoother now, but still laced with that same dangerous confidence. "We've been watching you for days, Harper. You think you can just come in here and poke around? You're in over your head." Jack's pulse spiked. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They had been watching him, the truck by the road, the strange behavior from Major. It had all been leading up to this moment. Whoever these people were, they had set a trap that Jack had walked right into. But Jack wasn't just any man. He wasn't someone who would back down in the face of danger. His training, his experience, had prepared him for moments like this. He had faced enemies, before enemies, who had underestimated him, who thought his age, his quiet life on the mountain, made him an easy target. They were wrong. "Who are you?" Jack called out, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "And what the hell are you doing here?" The voice on the intercom chuckled softly, the sound like a snake uncoiling. "You'll find out soon enough. But I wouldn't get too comfortable. You've just opened a door you can't close." Jack's mind was working overtime, analyzing every word, every nuance in the voice's tone. There was a deep underlying menace there, a threat veiled in the smooth words. Whoever was behind this operation was dangerous. This wasn't just a group of hackers or criminals, they were organized, powerful, and they had been here for far longer than Jack had realized. The light above the server racks blinked red again, the steady pulse of the motion sensor still intact, still watching. They were still tracking him. But Jack wasn't going to let himself be trapped. He couldn't afford to be cornered in this place. "We need to move," Jack muttered under his breath, more to Major than to himself. The dog's amber eyes met his understanding, the command, without the need for words. They moved quickly, Jack pulling the dog through the shadows, keeping to the side of the room, using the dim lighting to stay hidden. The sound of the intercom seemed to amplify as the footsteps grew closer, now echoing down the narrow hallways that ran beneath the mountain. Jack's breath became shallow, the weight of the mask and the tightness in his chest making it harder to focus. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. The last thing he wanted was to be caught in the open without the upper hand. He reached the steel door at the far end of the room, the one that led to the deeper corridors of the facility. The door was slightly ajar, the hinges rusty and old. It had been left unnoticed, unguarded, but now it felt like a lifeline. Jack grabbed the handle, his fingers slick with sweat, and eased it open just enough to slip through. Major followed close behind his body, a shadow against the darkness, his paws silent on the concrete. Jack moved quickly, pulling the dog through the narrow opening. They were no longer in the command center. The air was colder here, the walls lined with pipes and conduits. It smelled of old machinery, of oil and rust. The sound of footsteps was getting closer. Jack's mind raced. He had to buy himself some time. "We're going to have to make a stand," Jack muttered. He paused, looking down at Major, who seemed to be waiting for his next move. The dog's body was low to the ground, his muscles tight with anticipation. Jack reached into his pack and pulled out the block and tackle system he had rigged earlier, the pulley system that had been meant for pulling Major from the shaft. It was a crude but effective tool, perfect for making a quick escape or setting up a trap. But Jack had no intention of leaving just yet, not until he had answers. Not until he had found the people behind this. He worked quickly, his hands moving faster than they had in years. He attached the pulley system to a large rusted metal support beam overhead. It creaked under the weight of the rope, but it held firm. With a sharp tug, he tested it, making sure it was secure. The footsteps grew louder now, and Jack's heart rate spiked. They were coming closer. Whoever they were closing in on him. "Major," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "We have one shot at this." The dog's ears perked up, his head turning in Jack's direction as he stood tall, watching for the signal. Jack tightened his grip on the rope and prepared to pull it taut. But before he could make a move, the intercom crackled again. This time the voice was sharper, filled with an edge of anger that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stand on end. "Don't bother running, Harper. You won't get far. We've got this place locked down. You're not leaving here until we say so." Jack's eyes darted around the dimly lit corridor, his mind racing through possibilities. He knew the layout of the facility now, and he knew that the deeper he went, the more chances he had to stay ahead of them. But the reality of the situation was sinking in. They had already anticipated his every move. Whoever was in control of this place had thought of everything. And Jack, he was just a man. One man against an operation that had been running under his nose for who knew how long. He wasn't ready to give up yet. Jack exhaled slowly, making a decision in that moment. He could escape. He could run and live to fight another day. But something inside him, something old and buried, told him that running wasn't the answer. He had come here to protect this land, to protect the peace he had fought so hard to earn, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away from him. "Major, we fight. We end this now," Jack said, his voice calm and steady. The dog barked once the sound sharp and firm. They were about to find out what happened when you trespassed on Jack Harper's land. The game had changed, and Jack was ready for whatever came next. The dim buzzing hum of the facility vibrated through Jack's chest as he crouched hidden in the shadow of a large steel conduit. Major stood beside him, silent but alert, his amber eyes flicking between Jack and the distant growing sound of footsteps. They were close now. Too close. Jack's mind raced, calculating the risks, weighing his options. There was no way to escape without leaving a trail, without exposing himself. He had to face them. The intercom crackled again, the voice of the unseen enemy cutting through the thick silence like a knife. It was sharper this time, a tone laced with impatience and malice. "You think you can just waltz in here and walk out? You've made a serious mistake, Harper. You're trapped." Jack's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the machete at his side, his fingers numb with cold and adrenaline. He wasn't trapped. Not yet. Not until they had him cornered. He exhaled slowly, fighting the instinct to rush to charge in to retaliate. Patience was his advantage now, knowledge of this place, of his own land. He knew the corridors, the layout, the doorways, and hidden passageways, the places to move silently, and the places to create an advantage. The people who were hunting him didn't know this place. They didn't know him. He waited for the next sound, the next movement, something to tip him off, to give him the upper hand. Then a sound. The unmistakable shuffle of boots on concrete, the soft rustling of jackets and gear. Someone was near. Jack's eyes narrowed. He adjusted his grip on the rope and pulley system that hung from above. He had set it up earlier, but now it wasn't just a tool for climbing. It was a trap. The rope ran through the pulley, tied off at the other end to a massive metal beam. If he could get them into position, he could pull them into the trap. With the element of surprise and a little luck, he could disable them before they knew what hit them. Major, sensing the change in Jack's posture, shifted beside him, his ears perked, his body crouched low. He was ready. Jack let the footsteps come closer, the heavy sound of boots almost deafening in the tight metal-walled corridor. He steadied himself, waiting for just the right moment. His heart pounded in his ears, but his breathing remained steady. In this moment, he was back in the old rhythm, the one from his time in the field. It wasn't fear he felt. Now it was focus. It was necessity. Then the man came into view. Jack's instincts flared. The figure was tall, with broad shoulders and a tactical vest, a clear sign he was no low-level henchman. This was someone who knew how to fight someone who had been trained. His face was obscured by a helmet, but Jack could tell by the way he moved that he was confident, experienced. Jack didn't wait. In one fluid motion, he pulled the rope. The system groaned under the sudden strain, the block and tackle screeching as the pulley moved, sending a heavy beam swinging across the corridor. The man had no time to react before the beam slammed into his chest with a sickening thud. The force sent him flying back against the wall, crumpling to the ground with a harsh crash. Jack didn't hesitate. "Move, Major!" he barked. Major leapt forward, a blur of gray and white, and lunged at the figure sprawled on the floor. He had been trained for this: subdue, restrain, disable. The man's arms flailed, trying to push the dog off, but Major clamped down on his wrist with a vice-like grip, pinning him in place. The rest of the corridor was still. For a heartbeat, Jack thought he might have caught them off guard. Maybe he had the upper hand. But then a second figure appeared in the doorway, a silhouette in the dim light. "Behind you!" Jack shouted. But it was too late. The figure in the doorway raised his weapon, a sleek black rifle aimed directly at Jack. His finger twitched on the trigger, and for a split second, Jack saw the glint of metal. He could feel it, the final moment, the instant before everything went wrong. But before the rifle could fire, Major growled a deep guttural sound that froze the air in Jack's lungs. The second figure flinched, his aim faltering for just a moment. That was all Jack needed. He charged. With a yell, Jack rushed forward, using the momentum of his own weight to crash into the man, shoving him off balance. The rifle discharged into the ceiling, the bullet ricocheting off the metal walls with a sharp clang. In a swift motion, Jack wrenched the gun from the man's hands, twisting his wrist until he heard the satisfying snap of bone. The man let out a strangled cry of pain, but was quickly silenced when Jack drove his knee into his chest, pinning him to the floor. Jack's heart was pounding in his ears now, the adrenaline crashing through his veins. He could hear the heavy breathing of the second man beneath him, the crackle of static on the intercom, and the distant panicked footsteps of someone retreating down the hallway. Major released his grip on the first man's wrist, standing back as Jack moved to restrain him. With the man down, Jack quickly pulled the zip ties from his bag and secured his wrists. The second man wasn't moving. Jack turned his attention to the first man, now groaning and clutching his chest. He wasn't dead, but he was incapacitated. Jack's gaze flicked toward the end of the corridor, where he knew more people were waiting. He couldn't let them get away. He couldn't let them regroup and retaliate. His only chance was to get out of here, to disable the rest of the operation before they could rebuild. "You're going to tell me everything," Jack muttered as he kneeled down to the first man. His voice was low, calm, but there was no mistaking the threat behind it. The man let out a rasping laugh, blood dripping from his lip. "You're too late," he spat, his voice filled with spite. "They'll come for you. You can't stop it." Jack's patience snapped. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the emergency beacon, the one he'd kept hidden for a situation like this. He slapped it into the man's hand. "Start talking or I'll make sure you don't get to see tomorrow." The man's eyes widened as the reality of the situation hit him. He knew who Jack was, the old soldier, the one who had survived everything, the one who wasn't afraid to do what needed to be done, and that thought terrified him more than any gun ever could. "You've crossed the wrong people, Harper," the man muttered. "You're a fool if you think you'll get out of here alive." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't care about threats anymore. He had survived war-lost friends and buried the past so deep that nothing would stop him from protecting his home. "I don't need to survive," Jack said coldly. "I just need to make sure you don't." As if on cue, Major barked low and warning. Jack turned his head, his eyes narrowing. The sound of more footsteps, fast and heavy, was closing in on them. It was too late to run now. But Jack wasn't running. Not anymore. With one swift motion, Jack grabbed the man's rifle and dragged him to his feet. He shoved the weapon into the man's hands, making sure the barrel was aimed down the corridor where a second wave of enemies was coming toward them. "Take the shot," Jack ordered. The man's eyes widened in confusion and fear. "Do it," Jack pressed. "Or I will." The man hesitated, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Jack wasn't bluffing. With a grimace, the man aimed the rifle and fired once, twice. The sound of the shots rang through the corridor like thunder, but Jack wasn't watching them. He was already moving, pulling the man back toward the shadowed corner where they could regroup. "Let's finish this," Jack muttered, his voice low, his resolve unshakable. The first shot was fired in the heat of battle. The second shot that was fired with the cold certainty that Jack Harper was going to win this fight. The game had ended. The operation was about to be dismantled, and Jack was the one who had struck the first blow. The silence after the shots was deafening. It was over. For now. Major nudged Jack's side, his tail wagging in silent approval, his amber eyes fixed on Jack as if to say, "We did it." But Jack knew the truth: the war wasn't over, and the fight for his home had only just begun. The storm had passed, leaving the mountainside still and quiet once more. The cold air hung thick in the trees, a heavy silence settling over the land that Jack had fought so hard to protect. The weight of the battle, the fight against unseen enemies, the chaos of the raid had faded into the distance. But the scars remained etched in the dirt of the earth and the tired lines on Jack's face. Major sat by his side, as always, his large frame resting against Jack's leg, the dogs breathing slow and steady in tune with the rhythm of the world around them. The man and his dog, bound by more than just loyalty, bound by years of shared history, by battles fought not just in foreign lands, but on the home front. Together, they had faced what many would have run from, but neither of them had ever known the meaning of retreat. The quiet aftermath was a welcome one, but Jack couldn't escape the feeling that something had shifted irrevocably. He sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the clouds roll in thick and gray, and the first flakes of snow begin to fall again. The kind of snow that covered everything, that smoothed over the jagged edges of the world. It was as if nature itself was offering him a reprieve, an end to the struggle, if only for a while. The flashing lights of the police cars and the FBI vehicles had disappeared down the long, winding road, leaving behind nothing but the soft crunch of tires on fresh snow. The government had done their part. They'd sealed the facility, scrubbed the site, and promised never to reopen it. But Jack knew the truth. It wasn't the land that needed protecting. It was the spirit of it, the quiet peace that made this place his home. That was the real battle. Jack rubbed Major's head, feeling the weight of the dog's thick fur beneath his fingers. Major leaned into the touch, a soft sigh escaping from his lungs. The dog had never asked for anything more than Jack's presence, his trust, his command. That loyalty, simple, pure, had been the one constant through all of Jack's trials. And it was in the quiet moments like these, when the storm had passed, that Jack could finally breathe. In a way, the fight had been a reminder that even in the deepest silence, in the isolation that Jack had sought all these years, there were forces at work beyond his control forces that sought to disrupt the peace, to take what wasn't theirs. But Jack had learned long ago that there was no peace without a price. It was earned through vigilance, through sacrifice, and sometimes through standing firm against the storm. The mountains had taught him that. They had taught him the value of solitude, of hard work, of defending the things that mattered most. But they had also taught him something else. The mountain had given him Major, the constant companion who never left his side, and that bond had reminded him that sometimes strength isn't in fighting alone, but in having someone with you every step of the way. Jack glanced out across the snow-covered expanse. The world was quiet again, but beneath that silence, he knew the fight would come again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But when it did, Jack Harper would be ready. The mountain would be ready. because peace, like everything worth protecting, was never guaranteed. It had to be maintained. Major raised his head ears, alert eyes, searching the horizon. The bond between them was unspoken, but deep a connection that transcended words. Jack's gaze met the dog's, and for a moment the world outside seemed to fall away. "Let's go home," Major Jack said softly, his voice rough with exhaustion, but filled with quiet satisfaction. "It's done." With one last look at the snow-covered mountains that stretched out before him, Jack stood up, turning toward the cabin, where warmth and silence awaited. Major stood beside him, their footsteps echoing together in the snow. The world was still and cold, but there was a kind of peace in that. A peace that Jack had fought for, and one he would continue to protect, no matter the cost. As they walked into the warmth of the cabin, the wind began to pick up again, swirling the snow into the air in a quiet dance. The storm would pass. It always did, and when it did, Jack would be there with Major by his side, ready for whatever came next. In the end, it wasn't about the enemies they faced. It was about standing guard, about protecting what mattered most. That in itself was victory.